Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today is Edgar Martirosyan. Edgar is an attorney and also an active member of the Armenian community in Los Angeles. He is a strong advocate of democracy and see the revolution, the Velvet Revolution that took place in spring 2018 as democratic awakening of Armenians. Welcome, Edgar.
Thank you, Ani.
So you live in the United States. You pay close attention to the inner political developments in Armenia. What changes do you see here after the Velvet Revolution?
Well, I think there are many changes, but some of the ones that come to mind is first and foremost, for the first time, you have this sense of optimism that has taken place over society. The Armenian populace seems to be much more in tune with the political aspirations of the country, much more this feeling of investment, feeling of involvement. So that's definitely there, the optimism, the sense of hope for a better tomorrow. The more tangible things that I think that you see is first and foremost, for the first time in over 20 years, free and fair elections. And I think that's a big achievement for us. I think the next big achievement would be a transfer of power through free and fair elections, but that's sometime down the future, so we'll see what happens there. And a representative government, to some extent, I think this particular administration does represent the will of the people. Whereas in the past, I think 1991 was the only time that we could say that. That's been in question, whether the government does actually represent the will of the people. Now I think that's pretty clear that it does. To what extent, I guess we will see if and when the snap elections, parliamentary elections take place.
In Armenia, before the Velvet Revolution, we could feel that there was a hopeless feeling about what would be next, what would be the future. Was this feeling also shared by the diaspora, by the Armenian diaspora?
Well, it depends on what sector or which segment of the diaspora you speak of, right? There are the establishment organizations, whether it's the AGPU, the ARF, the ANCA. Their level of involvement and perception of Armenian politics is different. But as far as majority of diasporans, I guess, especially in the Los Angeles community, there was a sense of fatalism, right? That nothing is going to change. This is what our country has become, and we just have to deal with it. I think the Velvet Revolution definitely changed that. I think again, whether it's here or abroad, there is this sense of optimism that, you know, we can succeed at this politics thing. We can have a representative government. So I do think that trend did exist in the diaspora, and I do think that trend is now being reversed.
You talked about involvement or an increase of involvement now, or maybe bigger interest in what's going on in Armenia after the Velvet Revolution. How could you describe this new involvement or this new interest from the diaspora towards Armenia?
Well, I think there's a sense of excitement as to what can be done and how we can be involved in things of this nature. However, it's important to note that a majority of diasporans are not necessarily represented by some of the establishment organizations that we know that exist in the diaspora, that essentially organize the political life of the diaspora. And it's, I think, incumbent upon the government of Armenia to explore and find ways of engaging the sectors of communities outside of Armenia within the political and social and civic life of the country.
We'll go back to this question. For now, I have another one, again related to elections. Sure. On September 23, as you know, during the Yerevan City Council elections, the pro-Pashinyan My Step Alliance scored 81% of the votes. This is a huge score. In Europe, we call this we doubt about that kind of democracy, having that much of score. How do you interpret this result?
Listen, any one political party, any one political force having 81% of the vote, I think is, how do I put this, isn't necessarily the best recipe for a democratic governance. Nonetheless, again, it was free and fair elections, and it reflects the will of the people in different ways. I mean, there's a significant sector of that 21%, I mean 81%, does believe in the Pashinyan, Nikol Pashinyan's civil contract and then the My Step alliance and the politics and policies put forth by that alliance. And another, just as significant of a segment of that particular demographic, just outright rejected the administrations of the past, right? Particularly the Haka. So when you look at this 81%, is it a concerning number? Absolutely, it's a concerning number. I would hope that the number is much more tame, I guess you would say, when it comes to the snap elections. However, for the municipal elections, it simply reflects the will of the people. It's a rejection of the past and an embracing of the new. What we do with that, how that manifests in the future, will remain to be seen.
This is a democracy that we can call at the base of democracy, of the definition. So this is people electing other people that will govern their country according to their will. When Armenians in the diaspora saw that, what did they think? Are they themselves, for example, in the United States, living in this kind of democracy, or is there a back thought about that? Is there a new kind of analysis of what's going on in their own country, for example, in the US in this case? How the democracy is working in the US, and what we see in Armenia is another kind of democracy, a very popular one. Are there comparisons? Are there some wills to come back in the country after this, for example?
I think it's too early to answer some of those questions because at the end of the day, the United States, for example, is an established democracy, right? It has its institutions, it has a particular institutional memory and things of that nature. So there's a continuity to its functionality, whereas in Armenia, this institutionalization of democracy is just beginning. I mean, this is just 5 months old, and the recent elections bring with it a lot of questions with respect to, well, is this going to work? 81%, like you said, is a significant number. I think, I don't know what the diaspora's assessment of these particular issues is at this point in time, because this just took place. I think it remains to be seen. But there is absolutely a sense of, well, we can be involved in this process too, because there was an opening of Armenia's political landscape. I think this particular administration is sending the message that they are willing to listen, they are willing to engage, they are willing to involve the diaspora within, again, the political, the social, the civic life of Armenia. Now it's just a question of finding how that happens. I think if we can look in that direction, and if the government can establish programs that aims to achieve that, you will see an active diaspora community willing to become more involved with Armenia.
Related to what you just said, we often see that there is a break between the Armenian diaspora and Armenia, even a misunderstanding, and that was highlighted by the Velvet Revolution. Some institutions, Armenian institutions in the diaspora, didn't talked or stated what they should when it was necessary to. At least that's the kind of critics we heard. Would you say that there is this break really exists? If it's true, what is the cause?
Well, most of the diaspora, or most of the active diaspora, the voices that you hear and what you speak of, is through the establishment organizations in the diaspora, right? These are certain institutions, whether they're organizations or political parties, that have been around for some time and have very narrow objectives. Now, those objectives obviously are for the betterment of the Armenian people globally, but they tend to be much more narrow. And these organizations and these political parties tend to naturally pursue what is in the interest of their organization or their party. So the break that you speak of is that sometimes what is probably in the best interest of the Armenian state may or may not align with these interests outside. And it's a difficult reality to come to terms with, but that is the fact, right? That's how it just plays out. It's just a matter of understanding what are those interests, right? and how can we align those interests with the state's interest. I think involving segments of diaspora communities that are not necessarily represented by these organizations or these parties would further that goal, would help open up the diaspora as well. I mean, we see an opening in Armenia, but if we were to go to these diaspora communities and find the individuals who are not necessarily beholden to one organization or another, yet do have substantive input and can bring that input to Armenia, I think you will see an opening there too.
So how can we make this link between Armenia, reach out from Armenia, the diaspora? How you talked about some means that should be put in place, but what kind of means can be put in place for that?
Well, again, that's a policy question and that the government needs to answer.
The Armenian government?
I think so. I think the Armenian government needs to organize or find a way to reach out to these communities and these individuals who are out there but not necessarily represented. The Armenian government's traditional approach has been to go to these establishment organizations, to reach out to the political parties and these entities that exist outside of Armenia that, quote unquote, represent their communities. But if there's potential outside of that formal representation, that's largely untapped. Obviously, that potential is not going to, at this point in time, organize itself, or at least has not been successful in doing so. And I think it's incumbent upon the Armenian government to employ the resources of the state to reach beyond the establishment organizations, because the establishment organizations, for the most part, represent a minority of diaspora Armenians. A majority of diaspora Armenians, whether it's in Los Angeles, New York, or wherever, tend to be and remain unrepresented by any of these parties or organizations.
The Prime Minister, Paitjan, said that he really wanted to reach out the new community, create a new relationship between the Armenian community and Armenia. Is still nothing special has been done for now, because it's too soon, I guess. So how could this be done? Stating this is a first step?
Sure. Well, I mean, first and foremost, what is our goal, right? What do we intend to achieve? I think we need to clearly state that we need to reimagine Armenian diaspora relations, right? The framework through which we have analyzed this issue for the past 27 years now, and even more than that, is becoming obsolete. It's no longer working. Yet we still look at this relationship through the same prism that we have for the past 3 decades. I think understanding that we need to shift that prism, we need to reimagine how this relationship works, is a first step. And that first step needs to be vocalized, right? I think when the government starts to speak of this issue and starts to adapt itself in a way that it's able to receive these individuals who are not represented by the establishment, we'll see some movement towards that objective. But at this point in time, I think we just need to state the goal, that this is what we need to do. We need to reimagine, re-envision, and reapply this whole Armenia diaspora relationship.
Thank you for this talk, Edgar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching, and continue to follow us on CivilNet.am.